Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Like Jordan said, there is a designated slide at the end that says questions. So if you have any, drop them in the chat. I probably won't get to them until the end, but that way they're all kind of be in one place. So, like Jordan said, this is our first workshop, and the topic we're going to be talking about is imagery. And before we start, I want us to all imagine a purple cow. Close your eyes and think about a purple cow. Take a couple seconds, visualize your cow in the farm doing whatever cows do, and then open your eyes. You all just did imagery. That is pretty much the basis of imagery, is using your imagination to mentally see things happen and be done. So, what do you guys who might not know what imagery is think it is? Have any of you heard of it or used it before? Imagery is the practice of mentally visualizing yourself performing a specific skill to improve your ability in real life. A lot of times we see this in sports where people will kind of use imagery to improve their performance, whether that be focusing in on a specific skill or kind of going through the competition or the performance like step by step to kind of prepare themselves better. It kind of helps with performance anxiety, stress. Imagine yourself do something successfully and kind of walk through all the outcomes helps for it to be a little bit more smooth sailing and not so overwhelming for the athlete. So how can we use it? Like I said, you can prepare for a game or a sport. You can kind of go through each of the possible outcomes, whether that be good or bad, and then how you or your team want to kind of address it, go forward with it, handle it, whatever the case may be. You can work on a specific skill that you have trouble on. You could do this multiple times in increments of 10, 15, 20, whatever the case will be, whether that be shooting a goal, hoop, whatever the case is. But doing that times will kind of help build that mental muscle memory. Also looking at yourself from an outside perspective, we obviously see it through an internal lens when we do something, but if you kind of look at it as if you're on the outside or the sidelines or like a fan even, and kind of see yourself doing it, you're able to kind of fix changes and mistakes that you might not notice you make, but are able to then visualize yourself doing it correctly. So then again, with that mental muscle memory, when you go to do it, the chances of it being successful improve. It's not guaranteed, but it does definitely improve a little bit, especially the more you do it. Like I said earlier, visualizing performance outcomes, good and bad, and how we can handle them, and improving anxiety by preparing for anxiety-inducing situations. This happens a lot in sports. So, kind of just preparing yourself for all outcomes, how you would handle them, all the environments, from being familiar with it and preparing yourself for it, and then building your confidence on executing a skill. So again, this kind of goes for practicing a specific skill you might have trouble on. The more you do it, the more confident you'll be with it, whether that's using imagery or doing it in real life or kind of a combination of the two, it will be successful. Real world ways to use imagery. Just like we are not just athletes, we are human. Imagery is not just for sports. Some ways it can be used in the real world are problem solving, memorization, stress reduction, and managing pain. Does anyone have any other possible ways you think it could be used in real world situations besides what was mentioned here, or even going more in depth about how it could be used for the examples that were given? So there's four main components of imagery that points you have: controllability, vividness, the five senses, and the PET-LEP model. Controllability is knowing what you can control versus what you cannot, and focusing on the things that are in our control rather than the things outside. So, for example, some things in our control are our reaction to something, what we say, our behavior, breathing. Sounds very simple, but it is something that is in our control, and our ability to take a deep breath really does help certain situations. Doing our best and preparing properly. Things we cannot control, how our teammates play, coaches, the other team and their athletes, fans, refs, injuries, parents, temperature and weather. Also, again, if you guys have any other things that are in our control that I might not have mentioned, feel free to write them in the comments. It's always good to expand and remind ourselves the things that are in our control so we can focus on those rather than the things that are not in our control. The five senses, we kind of use these on a daily basis without even knowing it. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. When you're using imagery, it's very important to focus on all five of these elements to make it as real and as vivid as possible. So when say for example, you are preparing for a competition and you're trying to put yourself in that pre-competition mode. What do you see? What do you notice around you? If you're playing soccer, do you see trees? If you're playing basketball, do you see people starting to come in the gym? Gymnastics, like, do you see other people warming up? What do you see? What do you notice around you? It can be big things or small things. Hearing, what do you hear? Are people, or you hear the shoes on the court? Do you hear people cheering? Do you hear music playing? Do you maybe have a playlist that you kind of listened to before? Smell. What do you smell? Are you in a gym? Does it smell sweaty? Are you outside? Does it smell like the outdoors, fresh, green? What do you taste? Maybe you're chewing gum. Do you taste mint? Do you taste what you had for the previous meal? Whatever that might be. What do you feel? If you're playing basketball, you can feel the texture on the basketball. If you're lifting, you can feel the coldness from the barbell. If you're maybe playing soccer, you can kind of feel the sweat on you. So like I said, when you're using the five senses, it is very important to be as vivid as possible in terms of how detailed and clear you are to imagine things to their full capability. Um, it just kind of makes sure that we are fully immersing ourselves in the environment that we're trying to imagine ourselves being in. So being able to tap into those five senses and make things as real and as vivid as possible helps our mind be able to not distinguish between imagination and reality, and therefore building the muscle memory to help improve our skill in the future. PetLab model consists of seven things: physical, environment, task, timing, learning, emotion, and perspective. These all kind of fit into what imagery is. For physical, you have movement sensations, so what your body's doing, your muscle tensions, how you physically are feeling. Environment is kind of going back to the five senses, visualizing your surroundings, your smells, what you see, what you hear. The task is the detail of what you're doing. Are you kicking a goal? Are you shooting a hoop? Are you coaching your athletes? Whatever the case may be, a specific task. Timing, this is very important when doing imagery. You want to make sure, again, with being realistic, you also want to be realistic with the timing, tempo, pace, and speed of your performance as if it were performed in real life. So if you normally say free throws like 70% of the time, you want to make sure you're still being consistent with that. Or if you're running and you typically run a 10-minute mile, whatever the case may be, you want to make sure you're still going at that same pace to make sure that, again, the brain is able to imagine it as clear and as vivid as possible, like if it was real life. And going again along with that learning, you want to make sure you're on the same level of experience and stage of learning that you are in real life. So if you're in high school, imagine yourself being in college or the NBA right now. You want to focus on where you currently are, the level of sport that you currently are, in the stage of learning that you're in. Emotions, kind of going back to the senses. What do you feel when you perform? What feelings can you put in that state or environment of performing? Just focusing again on all the emotions. Are you anxious before performance? Are you happy? Are you excited? Are you pumped up? Maybe you're calm, whatever emotion you feel. And then the last one is perspective. Sometimes, we talked about this earlier, sometimes viewing yourself from an outsider perspective, like a fan would see you on the sidelines, and not as you completing the skill through your own eyes, can help identify maybe mistakes you don't realize you're making, or just help you visualize yourself doing it correctly. Does anyone have any emotions that they think are typically felt during performance or that they themselves have felt before a performance, during a performance, after a performance that they think might be important to kind of focus in on when using imagery? And again, if you don't want to say it out loud, you can put it in the chat. But being able to be aware and acknowledge these, I think, is very important. Why it works. So, imagery, I said earlier, is essentially mental muscle memory, and the brain has trouble identifying what is our imagination and what is reality. So, when we do something multiple times in our imagination, we're able to kind of build that muscle memory that you would in reality. So, if you practice doing something in your imagination 20 times and you do it in reality 20 times as well, you're kind of doubling your ability to enhance your performance with that skill. And um, they're also processed the same way. By using imagery, you can build mental muscle memory by doing a skill successfully. So again, if you're maybe not able to go to the gym, go outside, practice physically, you can practice doing it mentally and go through it multiple times successfully. The key is success. If you're doing a specific skill, you want to make sure you're doing that skill in your imagination correctly, the right way, making a basket, shooting a goal, all those types of things. So that way your muscle can or your mental muscle memory can see you doing something correctly and can do it correctly or have a better chance of doing it correctly in reality or in person. Okay, activity time. This is kind of a simple activity, but one that I think is really beneficial. So it's called Film Yourself in Your Mind. First, I want you to think of a specific skill that relates to competition, whether that be you playing competition or be coaching, whatever the case may be. But the environment setting is competition day. I want you to identify a skill that could be used at that competition and then look at yourself doing it from two different perspectives. One perspective is through your own eyes, how you would normally see the skill being done, meaning all the stuff around you. And another one would be from the lenses of someone else. I want you to perform each skill 3 times in both perspectives, so 6 times total. And then we will reconvene and go over the different questions. So, specific skill performed 3 times in two different perspectives. Your own perspective through your own lens, and then an outsider perspective. And preferably a skill that relates to competition. I'll give everyone a couple minutes to do that, and then we will come back for the questions that go along with it. Okay, I hope everyone had enough time to do that. I also did it in my head because I think it's a cool activity. So, what were some differences that you guys noticed between the two perspectives? And what was the task that you did?
I pictured myself driving to the basket for, I played soccer, but I've been doing a lot of coaching of basketball players, so I pictured that.
Nice. Did you notice a difference between the two perspectives when you were doing it versus watching yourself do it?
Well, it's interesting because I think what felt more natural was watching myself from an outside perspective doing it, but I don't know if that's the most effective. So that was kind of interesting.
It is. It's something that we don't really recognize. I also did a basketball example when I was doing it. I just did like a free throw shot, and ironically, I thought the same thing. I was like, wow, I feel like I can notice a lot more from an outsider perspective than doing it myself. But like you said, it didn't seem as effective because you can't, like, yes, you can see what you're doing and maybe like where your foot is, how you're shooting, whatever the case is, but you're not physically doing it or imagining yourself doing it. So it does kind of have pros and cons.
Think we have Alejandro in the chat. He said that he visualized himself winding up for a kick on the field, which was one as well.
Did one feel more effective than the other, or was there a major difference you noticed from one perspective versus the other? You can write it in the chat again if you don't want to unmute yourself. I do think it's interesting to kind of notice the difference that you might see when looking at yourself from an outsider perspective doing a task, especially doing the same task when you compare through your own lens versus through an outsider lens. It is very interesting to kind of see yourself do something successful rather than actually do it successful through your own lens.
Yeah, I
Um,
feel the same way because I think for my example that I did was since I was a track runner, I did long jump and like it was so easy to see me doing it 100% correct. But then when I think back to when I did it, um, and it was just me doing it, there were different aspects to which I wasn't maybe doing it properly, or in the way that maybe a coach would tell me how to do it. Um, so I think what is kind of cool is if you are able to imagine those things in the correct setting, while you're doing it, it'll help you perform in that way. Because if there's not that connection between the mind and the body, then you actually being able to perform that, it may be really difficult. Um, so yeah, that was my take on it.
I also think you bring up a good point about like being able to see yourself doing something kind of can show you what you're doing correctly and what you're not doing correctly. So I think it could be really beneficial and important if you do an outsider perspective first. Notice things that you might be doing wrong. Maybe you do see a mistake that you're doing, or maybe you notice something that you did that you don't do, and that's why it was successful. And then do it through your own lens, but keeping those details that you noticed in mind. So, like, okay, my right foot was a little ahead of my left. Let's do that next time I imagine myself shooting a free throw because it seemed to be successful from an outsider perspective. Kind of keeping like our attention on those little minor details that we notice from an outsider perspective, I
Mhm.
think makes doing it very successful because they do matter. They might not be looked at the most, but little things do matter.
Got some more things popping in the chat. Annika stated that she imagines herself performing choreography on the stage, and she felt that doing it through her own lens felt more real. And then Alejandro stated that from when he was kicking, it was easier to pinpoint what he needed to do from an outside perspective.
And that is big for improvement, especially when you know what certain things are supposed to look like or what things look like when they're done successfully. So I do think in that sense it is very beneficial. But like Annika said, it is hard for things to feel as real if you're looking at it from an outsider perspective, which is why I think having a combination of the two is really beneficial because you are able to kind of hone in on those small details that maybe make us feel successful, and then you're able to be more mindful of them when you're actually doing this skill through your own lens.
Mhm.
Um, I think it was challenging for me to place myself from an audience standpoint, but felt like I was able to imagine moving with more ease. Picture myself in the batter's box hitting in high school, and it's definitely easier for me to see it from our perspective compared to an outsider. It definitely is easier doing something rather than seeing something from an outsider's perspective, especially when you've been doing it for so long. So I do think that is interesting how challenging the different perspectives can be to imagine. But like I said, I do think they both have their pros and cons, and they're both beneficial if done kind of properly and for the right reason. And in my opinion, in outsider and then personal lines. But it does depend on the skill. But just again with the five senses, kind of be aware of everything yourself, your movement, your position, how far you are from something, what's around you, be very mindful of things when you're imagining, and it should definitely help be successful. We have made it to the questions portion. Does anyone have any questions about imagery? Yes, okay. Going off of that, I think it's very important, especially when improving technique, to record yourself because then when you're using imagery, you have that outsider perspective already recorded. So you can look at that and imagine that and watching it. Like for example, I weightlift sometimes, so I'll record myself lifting and be like, oh, I need to put my shoulders back. I need to do this. I need to do that. So then when I do it again and record myself again, you're able to kind of see those changes slowly progress into success. But it is something that you might not notice unless you record yourself. So you did bring up a very good point. Thank you for saying that. I would definitely say, kind of like I just said with the example, recording yourself multiple times, like each time to kind of see if you see improvement, I think is a good sense, and making sure that you're watching the video a couple of times and looking at different things each time you watch the video. Like maybe looking at your arms in one, how you're hitting in another, your legs, your position, whatever the case may be. But I think just being able to watch it multiple times and having multiple videos can really show kind of like your progression and what you want to focus on. And then you can kind of also hold yourself accountable and be like, am I focusing on that? Is this improving? Is that improving? Um, I do think that's a really good one. Also, kind of simple, but closing your eyes really helps imagery also be successful because you're able to kind of cancel out all of the real world distractions and focus in on what you really want to be imagining. Um, in this case, bat or baseball. So I definitely think being able to really put yourself in that environment, focus on the five senses, close your eyes, really put yourself there, then I think it should be a little bit more successful. But definitely just repetition and multiple times is the best way to go about it.
Um,
Except for the advice.
the question that I have comes from a coach's perspective. One, how can coaches translate this workshop so they're able to show their athletes how to use imagery effectively in their sport? So say, I know we have Amy on here, and she coaches. How would she be able to show them what she's trying to get them to do or execute what she's trying to get them to do? How do we make imagery something that translates for the athletes?
So there's a couple ways you can kind of go about this. The first one that popped into my head is maybe if there's a specific skill, like if you're working one-on-one with someone or someone who is a player is struggling with a specific skill, watching a video of it done successfully, maybe it's not the actual person, and then kind of starting off the imagery for that person is like, okay, here's how it's supposed to look. Now let me put myself in their shoes and do it successfully and kind of build off of that. You could also do this in a group setting of having everyone close their eyes and then whatever the objective is of the sport. I think you mentioned basketball. Having them close their eyes, having them be at the free throw line and make 10 successful free throws, having them make 10 successful layups, just having them imagine doing things successful in their own self. And whether that, if it is challenging for them, play a video or have them do it correctly, have them kind of lock in on how they felt during that or write down how they felt during that moment so they can go back to it when they are trying to imagine it and be like, okay, this is what I smelled, this is what I heard, this is what it felt like, this is something that I think I did well. Or even you could record practice or record someone doing it if they do want to kind of see themselves doing it. I do think that is a really helpful method. Um, but I think just having everyone kind of, even if it's just like a moment to relax or a water break or whatever the case may be, it doesn't need to be anything that takes super long, but just having people close their eyes and imagine themselves doing something successfully, I think really does have a very positive and impactful like circumstance or outcome when it is such a specific skill. I've always heard reps of 10. And then like multiple times a week. So essentially, we could give them like homework and say like, okay, after practice, try to do this 10 more times, 20 more times, whatever the case may be. It does correlate where it's the greater number of reps that you practice, the more successful it'll be. So it's really just how many times that that person wants to. So I don't really think there's like a correct number in terms of reps. I think the more the better, the more the merrier. But like it does I don't want it to turn into something that's like exhausting. I still want it to be a good resource. So I think 10 or 15 is like a safe number if you're doing it multiple times. Or you could even do like beginning and end of practice or beginning of every practice, depending on how often practice is. But that way you can kind of get them engaging and being mindful about it. And then this can also, if you do it at the beginning of practice, have them kind of be aware of what they do when they do something successfully. Did they start with their left foot, right foot, all that kind of stuff? But it'll kind of make them hone in on those little details that they might otherwise overlook.
Another question that I have goes to the connection to um, emotional stability while playing sports. I know a lot of athletes get frustrated in time of competition, um, or they're super happy. But there are sometimes times where things are a little bit less stable. Would you say imagery is a good thing to do when it comes to trying to get an athlete back into the game? Say they're in a game and maybe something's not going right. Maybe they've been missing a bunch of shots. Do you think imagery would be a solution for that? Um, in all honesty, and also knowing that not every it may not work for everyone, but yeah, what do you think?
I definitely think if there's an environment that calls for it and there is like a little maybe space at the end of the bench or like a little bit of a separated spot where that person can maybe close their eyes and imagine doing things successful or kind of imagining turning the game into something a little bit more positive that it might not be right now. I think that's definitely feasible and won't take much time. I do think in certain environments in certain sports it can definitely be challenging, just given like all the noise and the atmosphere in general. But maybe even during halftime, I think that would be something that could be really helpful if the game is starting off a little rough. Maybe have the team close their eyes and imagine working together a little bit more, making plays happen, making things done, getting things done, scoring. But having everyone kind of do it collectively, I also think would be really beneficial because it is a team effort. And unfortunately, that kind of is why, like, yes, imagery works for a person, but again, it's only what you can control. So, in terms of like a game going well, if you're doing everything you can, yes, imagery will help you kind of maintain that and maybe even improve. But unfortunately, circumstances of games and performance don't solely rely on you. But I do think if you kind of get the team to do it collectively, where you're able to be like successfully making passes, successfully doing X, Y, and Z, then things will be a little bit more cohesive and everyone will be able to work together a little bit better. It just kind of depends on other external um, factors and things that would otherwise be outside of our control, unfortunately. But it definitely is a skill that can help overall. I think that's a great idea, actually. I think honestly, that's why I like recording so much because then you're able to be like, I did that, I can do that, I'm able to do that, I'm capable of doing that, I've done it before. And you also have a reference for when you're imagining something. I think that is such a good idea, and I really do think that helps people because it's very easy to get down in the dumps when something goes wrong. So having those moments, especially when it is concrete, like a video or a mental highlight reel, even like a mental like I'm almost thinking a mental folder of like greatest hits, but like greatest plays, where someone can just kind of like pull from that folder or even make it like a physical thing where you do have your greatest pictures or videos or whatever the case may be as like a reminder of like, hey, not every day is going to be perfect, but that's okay. Appreciate the small wins. Things are going to be not so great some days and things are going to be great other days, but kind of reminding ourselves that we are capable of doing it and also emphasizing the word yet, that just because we can't do something now, we're, we just can't do it yet. It's not an everything. I think that would be very big. That kind of taps into the five senses. kind of hearing like the whistles and like you said, the buzzers, definitely a good strategy. Going back to the pet lab model too, also like making things as real as possible. Jordan, can you go back to that slide? Sorry.
Give me a second.
Should only be like one or two before. Yeah. Um, that would be like emotion and timing. So like same pace, same speed with the whistle, you know when things start, kind of imagining a whistle so you know when to start, I think would be a great thing. But yes, definitely a big part is auditory and even like hearing your teammates talking, depending on the sport, if you hear someone yelling your name to pass you the ball, like every little detail is what goes into it and contributes to make everything as clear and as vivid as possible. And that really is like one of the forefront of imagery is vividness and five senses. So I definitely think that's a huge thing to help with visualization.
I want to add because I actually saw a video. I want to say it was yesterday of some either motorcyclists, like race or like race car drivers, and they had the audio of the track, like of the cars racing, and then they were like they had their eyes closed and they were turning with the sounds, and I was like, that is actually really cool because they're visualizing exactly what they're doing, and there is an audio connected to that. So yeah, wow, that was kind of cool that that question came up, and then I made that correlation of that's a thing.
You made me also have a correlation. So I'm from Maryland, East Coast girl over here. And the football team, or one of them, is the Washington Commanders. And the quarterback for that team, Jaden Daniels, uses HR, like
Okay.
anything. Um, and they literally have like the practice field so he can practice throwing or even like visualize plays with this HR thing and not even throwing, just kind of like the field where players might be looking at plays, running plays mentally, and it has like worked tremendously for him. He thinks it's such a good thing. It does have to be in like increments, but I do think with like technology and stuff, having those like is it HR? I don't know if that's what it's called.
VR?
VR, thank you. That was close. It was but yeah, it's really cool how he's able to kind of literally just put these goggles on and go through plays and his mind is able to know and like study them. So then when it comes to reality, he's not frazzled. He knows what to do. He's seen it happen before. He's watched it happen successfully. So yeah, great examples and great real world connections. I love that. Beautiful. Thank you guys so much for coming and being engaging. I really appreciate it. Considering this is our first one back, I think this went very well, and I'm so glad all of you pitched in and helped out.
Yes.
And yeah, thank you so much
Appreciate
for coming, everyone.
Yes. We do have our next one up on our website. It's gonna be Confidence and Motivation, led by Darren Lee. So super, super excited for that one. It'll be on April 8th, so feel free to sign up when you get a chance, and share it as well. So thank you again, guys. Abby, you did a wonderful job welcoming
Thank
us
you.
back. So awesome.